So, good morning everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to us. Well, as I was introduced, I'm a director of one of these PTA institutes in Europe, and specifically in our part of Belgium. And I will tell you some more about this later on. But first, maybe let me tell you this. What is this about? I always, when I do these kinds of presentations, I have to choose mine. Well, I can't see it on the list. Is it the second one?
I think it's the second one.
Second. Yes.
Is it?
Okay. So I now open it up. Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Always these small technicalities. So what actually I always try to give a broad image of the field of technology assessment. I always try to give this, try to repeat what an old professor of mine, when I was a student, said. Was a sociologist from Holland, Professor Henk Becker, who was into impact assessment, environmental impact assessment, later social impact assessment, and so on. He always said, well, people always have tried to avoid decisions they might regret later. And so that's the idea behind impact assessment. Least regret strategies or no regret strategies for decision makers. And this actually is, let's say, the environment in which we got the inspiration, and decision makers got the inspiration of setting up capabilities and institutes to support them to have this kind of better least regret strategies or better decision making. A very normative aim. Better decision making in the field, complex field of science, technology and society. And this goes back not a couple of years, but really goes back until from the 70s, 60s, 70s. Huge projects, huge scale projects in the United States, going to the moon, nuclear technologies, military technology and so on. And all the questions you can ask next to that. From a decision making point of view. Well, of course, if you see in the title Parliamentary Technology Assessment, please don't understand that we as small parliamentary institutions all around Europe have the monopoly of doing this kind of impact assessment. It's very important that you see that in the different countries of Europe, and even in the countries where you have these small institutes next or in parliaments, you have capabilities, research capabilities and competences that really are academical sometimes, very concrete, very pragmatical, of doing research and reporting on environmental impacts, social impacts, ethical impacts, economical impacts of new technologies on society, and also look at the problems created by this. I will come into that later. So we as PTA institutes, we don't have the monopoly of doing this environmental or social or ethical or economical impact assessment of this technological developments and developments in science. But at a given point in history, parliaments, mainly parliaments, choose to institutionalize these capabilities, and that's where we got our origin from. So that's a bit the spectrum of the broader spectrum of what I'm going to tell you about. So I will go into the technology assessment, the rationale of technology assessment briefly, and then further on be more specific and draw or map a little bit how these parliamentary institutions got into existence, what their functions are, and what their aims are and so on, and then draw the landscape in Europe and give some more details on one specific institute and its activities, which actually is ours in Flanders, and is one of the more recent ones, and actually is set up 10 years ago by the Flemish Parliament. So let's start with the definition. Technology assessment, of course, is something that is dynamic. it hasn't been always how we define it now. In the 70s, technology assessment was something different than now. In the 70s, technology assessment was a practice mainly to objectively and in a neutral way assess the impacts of the technology, science and technology on society. A bit from a positivistic way of thinking that you can map this, you can calculate these impacts, and you can even predict them. Of course, if you look at it from the position we are in now, this was a bit too ambitious. You cannot really predict what impacts are. You can assess them. And this is the way things evolved over the last 20, 30 years. And from this kind of early warning kind of TA, blinkering a red light when something might go wrong, remember least regret strategies, from, let's say, a more participative, constructive way of looking at how technologies are constructed and decisions about technologies can be constructed in society. So this is a very brief summary of an evolution of about 30 years. Where are we now? Well, technology assessment now is defined as, first of all, a scientific practice. A process, a scientific process, which of course uses scientific criteria to judge its work, to assess its work. Interactively, this means that it's an open process in which different partners, different stakeholders, different groups, societal strata, societal groups, which are involved, decision makers, industry, NGOs sometimes, the broader public, and so on, are brought together, sometimes in a different way, sometimes only experts, sometimes only decision makers, expert and decision makers, sometimes the larger public is involved. So, but the interactive way of processing these activities are, let's say, at this moment very well, let's say, present in technology assessment. It's also a communicative process, and that's why I think the way you reproduce your knowledge and you disseminate your knowledge and you valorize your knowledge towards your clients, those who use these knowledge, decision makers and so on, is very important. And I have a second let's say, idea that I got from Henk Becker. Professor Henk Becker, he always said, well, if you produce a policy report of 400 pages, make a summary of 40 pages. Oh no, make a summary of 4 pages. No, it's better to make a summary of 4 lines, because this is going to be read by politicians. For the rest, they don't have time. I remember the Lord scientist in Lord Kenneth, I think, once said, I exactly have half a minute of time to read your reports. So please, if you produce them in a way we can understand it, read it very quickly, or one of my collaborators can read it and summarize that again for us. You see, in this kind of environment, in this kind of practical environment, political environment, we work. That's why communication is so important, not only to the decision makers, your client group, but also to the broader public. But I will come to that later. Scientific, interactive, communicative process to contribute, as I said, to a better decision making, to the formation of political and public opinion on societal aspects of science and technology. So the formation of opinion. So this is something different than just adding valuable material to decision-making processes. It's more than that. So the outreach to society is there. The outreach to the broader public of politicians is there. So this modern, very modern and actual definition of TA has been written down in a group of a European project we have worked in the midst of the years 2000. So, and from early warning to constructive to interactive to participatory TA, all of these different schools of practices exist and exist next to each other. They are not competing, because for some subjects, for some issues, we use participatory TA, where there are very high controversies, for example. Sometimes, if the technology is still in a very early phase of development, Well, what you need then is to look at signals in which, like for example nanotechnology, some of the issues that have to be dealt with can produce societal issues in the future. So you have to really watch out and look at these critical issues in emerging technologies. So this still exists. So next to each other. So let me talk now about what we are doing in this parliamentary technology assessment community. And I repeat it, we don't have the monopoly in DA. Look at, for example, countries like Holland or countries like Germany, in which you have the large academic community which also does technology assessment, but in its own environment, with its own clients and so on, not in this very specific political environment we are working in. So here you have a list actually of motives, characteristics, essential elements for technology assessment to grow in, parliamentary technology to grow in. You have the need for, of course, independent assessments. I think it's very important to stress this. Why are we created in parliaments? And why in parliaments is because in parliament all society is represented, the opposition and the majority. So, for example, my institute, my board, politicians of all parties are represented. Half of the board are politicians from all political parties, and half of them are academicals who are appointed by the parliament. So you see there is this kind of balancing for neutrality, for objectivity. Of course, this is an aim, this is an objective, and we try to reach that. But this independent way of working is very important, because independence is credibility. Without credibility, no impact. So this is something which is, I think, very important. So this needs for this assessments independent assessments of science and technology. So it's also a very specific environment, a very specific policy context. Informing and advising parliaments, of course, is something different than forming a government. A government has a program, has made choices, tries to realize that. Broader discussion about this and the control of the government is happening in parliament. And then you need different knowledge instruments. And these we are creating in our environments, and I think with some degree of success. So a parliament, the old function of a parliament as a place in which you can discuss broader issues, develop visions, with a beautiful French word, a chambre de réflexion, a room in which you can draw yourself together back and and sit with some peers together and think about essential issues. Well, this is, I think, a very important role that we are supporting with information, but also with recommendation and advice. So it's also a specific research context, of course. It's multidisciplinary. The teams, all these small groups are of researchers, are composed of social scientists, bioengineers, physicists, and just name it. And now and then also a philosopher, because the ethical dimensions also are drawn into our way of problem definition and working. As I said, it's a multidisciplinary context. And it's mainly now problem-driven. So if we have the idea or the intention of dealing with one of the new emerging technologies, we prefer to do it in a problem-driven way. So we look specifically, for example, at the environmental implications of nanotechnology. Not so much just at what's nanotechnology, what can nanotechnology mean for our society, and what kind of economical progress and growth can be a result of nanotechnology. Other institutes do that. Lots of institutes do that, more than we, and have sometimes a bigger impact than we. But we look at the question in a different way. We say, well, we had these big discussions about biotechnology in Europe. Let's have a broad societal discussion also on nanotechnology. Some say to avoid these problems we have in Europe with biotechnology. Some say no, to construct an environment in which you can think constructively about in which way nanotechnology can fulfill its societal expectations. So this is a different way of thinking and different way of defining problems. When you do this, of course, you go beyond the expert opinion. You go beyond that what you do in your office when you do research. You go into society, or you ask society into your office, into the parliament, and have a discussion with these different stakeholders on these different issues you define. That's why TA is becoming more and more participative. And even, I will give some examples later, we do it with inviting parts of the broad public into our parliament and have discussions with them and try to get opinions, strong opinions from society into parliament, and try to articulate positions that are maybe not so obvious in newspapers and so on. So this is the way we try to. And of course, it's a practical attitude. It's not a philosophical attitude. I mean, it's we try to have impact on decision making. Because as I said before, without credibility, no impact. Without impact, there's no use of having TA. So, summarizing, the guiding principles of PTA is that we are very much client-oriented. Our client is the parliament. It's not the government, it's not the broad public, it's the parliament. And this is very important because the parliament is a difficult client. It is a client that has a lot of questions, really, a lot of, it's a difficult client. It's hard to work for a parliament. So you have to, with a small group, pay your attention 100% on that parliament. It's, as I said already twice, I think, it's problem-driven rather than technology-driven, which does not mean that we go into details about technology and really try to do that in a science-based way. And there we find our colleagues in the other institutes. And then I can tell the one who asked these questions, we exchange lots of information basic information on these emerging technologies. Because we know that we can trust our colleagues in the other parliaments, and we exchange it. We have a beautiful website, you can find all these informations there. And if the Germans, who are very good in producing very thick reports and thorough reports on nanotechnology, for example, we will not do this work over, because nanotechnology is something is quite global. Of course, it will be specific about Germany, we can do something specific about Belgium, about Flanders, adding to that. But we don't try to do this work twice. It's constructive rather than acceptance-oriented. It's a very important notion, I think. If you think about the aim of technology assessment. And we still have to struggle against the idea that we are there to make people accept difficult technologies. And lots of actors, lots of stakeholders, also a lot of politicians still expect this from us, because politicians change all 4 or 5 years. So each time we have to rehearse this kind of, repeat this kind of very important aspects, that we are there to construct rather than accept technologies. And that's a very important notion. We can come into that maybe later in the discussion, especially when we talk about nuclear waste, for example. It's prospective, it looks toward the future, and we are not evaluating, very important, we are, let's say, ex-ante evaluators. We look before things happen to what possibly the impact can be, and assess that. We don't evaluate the policies of the government. It's taboo. We cannot. And it's better not to do that. We are not, there's other organisms, other councils, and so on, who do that. We don't evaluate. There's a second question we ask when we choose an item. Is there an evaluation of policy, governmental policy in that? And we don't do that. It's for other. That's why we are a parliamentary organization. Maybe TA organizations, other ones, are asked to do evaluatory studies on governmental policies, but we don't do that. It's also very pragmatic, as I said. We look into an issue and try to choose the capabilities and the methods in function of that issue. We don't have clear designs for how do we deal with a project. or how do we deal with an issue? And I will give some examples later on. So how does this look like? How does this look like in Europe? And I think if you write down, Mr. who asked the question about nanotechnology, www.network.org, you can find all the studies there that are going on and in the past have happened. Also lots on nanotechnology. So this network is a very dynamic network. It's not a formal network. We have a changing presidency every year. The 13 institutes are member of that. There are some associated members and so on. It's mainly national or some regional, like Catalonia and Flanders are a member of that. And we exchange a lot of work. We could not be there, what we do, if we wouldn't have this kind of networking. It's very important. So we learn of each other all the time. We also have some projects going on, but as I said, it's not our main objective. If we can have some added value in a win-win situation of doing a European project like this one, for example, we will do it. But it's not our aim to grow and do all kind of European project. Why? Because we have this difficult client, the Parliament. And the Parliament says, well, please work for us, don't work for the European community here. We are financing you, please stick to your main clients. So this comes always back. We have had some European projects though, Europta on participatory research, TAMI on methods and impacts, thinking systematically about the impact of technology assessment, which is of course very important, and then PACITA now, it's about development and institutionalizing a TA in Europe. There is a Technopolis group report which I can show you, which is, I think, much better than what I tell you what I'm talking to you about here. It's based on some surveys that have done for the European Parliament, and there you can find all the details, and not so subjectively as I try to transfer them to you here. So, and I really recommend you to read this, and I will give you some examples on how they see the different models in Europe. And then, of course, if you want to have a look at how really these organizations work, very soon PACITA will publish all these descriptions, thorough descriptions of, it was said by Nika, of these different institutes all over Europe, because it's a very heterogeneous situation. There are no two institutes that are the same, which makes it not easy. So these are the models. Actually, if you look at the axis, how do we divide, or how do Technopolis divide PTA in Europe? On the one side, you have an institute in Parliament, or you have an institute out of Parliament. You have a function of informing Parliament or informing Parliament and stimulate the societal debate on that. Remember, participatory, involving the great public, and so on and so on. And then you see that all these parliaments have different, situate themselves in this field in a different way. And let's start with the very traditional ones, if I can say it. In that way, the parliamentary committees, which actually do technology assessment, but as a parliamentary committee in Parliament, like OPEXT in France, like in Italy, like in Greece, and like in Finland, the Committee of the Future, which is, I think, a very important model also. They inform Parliament are inside Parliament, because they are the committee of the Parliament. And then next to that, informing Parliament, you have these offices. It's sometimes inside Parliament, sometimes the Parliament tenders, or writes out the tender to institutes to fill in this need for advice and information. And for example, Sweden, European Parliament, STOA, the UK Post in Catalonia has the same situation, and as I said, in Germany, which is backed up by a huge institute, the KIT in Karlsruhe. And then if you move a bit more to stimulate societal debate, play a role outside of Parliament, and involve actors, involve stakeholders from outside Parliament, you have these different institutes like my own, the Swiss one, TA Swiss, the Danish, the Norwegian, and the Dutch Durant and Institute. So we invite citizens, for example, and we try to play a role in the societal debate, to inform this this societal debate, to structure it, not to stimulate it, because that's not our role, but to structure it in terms of arguments, in terms of positions, to articulate clearly for decision makers what the different attitudes and what the different positions of stakeholders are. And sometimes, and lots of times, it differs from what newspapers say positions are. So this is a broad picture. If you look at, as I said before, those who are involved in these processes, well, you can see that if you look at the bottom there, you have the expert opinion driven practices, you have expert and stakeholders, formal stakeholders, which are involved in the activities, in the projects, in the research, and you also have, let's say, the broader model where experts, stakeholders and the society at large is drawn into, whose opinions are drawn into these projects. But this becomes clearer, I think, if you look at some examples. So this is how the map of PTA map of Europe looks like now, and of course you see this yellowish countries where we don't have PTA activities yet, and some of the countries have some seats of PTA, and these are a bit more pronounced yellow. So this is how the situation looks like in Europe. What are we doing? What kind of topics do we deal with? What kind of issues do we deal with? If you look at the survey Technopolis did over the last 5 years, you see that actually we are dealing with the main issues, the main problems, the main topics that are on the agenda on the science, on the innovation, on the technology agenda, climate change, energy use, energy production, health, ICT, and so on. And it goes until sustainable or transport. Nanotechnology is also growing, and if you would look at the last couple of years, synthetic biology is now high on the agenda and is a topic, very vivid topic now in the EPTA institutions. And there again, we look at what colleagues did and try to use this information, because the situation is not different regarding the ethical dimensions, for example, of synthetic biology in the United States or in Europe, in Germany or in Flanders. So how does this process look like? How you come to, let's say, kind of institution of TA. What you need is very important. That's what I call political entrepreneurs. You need politicians who stick out their neck. Politicians who want to take the risk to defend these issues. Because we should not forget, although it's high on the discourse agenda, technology and science are not high on the political agenda. Innovation is, yes, but that's an economical translation of, let's say, science and technology policies. So that's very important. Although there's a lot of noise on science and technology, it's giving huge importance. It's hard to find politicians who really want to specialize in this field. Mainly because politicians are mainly people who have a kind of lawyer education, who don't have the background, who have to hire experts to do that. All kind of reasons to do that, to see this phenomenon. But of course, we need, and if you look at the different institutes, there were always some politicians who took risks. And also, it's not independent from what happens in society. The biotechnology, huge biotechnology discussions we had end of the last century, translated, mutated into lots of controversies and lots of political discussions, and also gave birth to the institute I'm heading now. So you need this kind of political momentum. Without politics, without decision making, no institutionalization. And of course, it's a process. Some of these institutes don't survive political evolution. You had the OTA in 1995 in the United States, which was abolished by Newt Gingrich because of no use, too much money. You had the institute in Baden-Württemberg, a big one, 200 people working there, from one day to the other was abolished. Our institute will be re-institutionalized into the government as a formal science advisory council kind of thing. So you see all these, also the Danish are now under political stress. So these political environments change, which means that also this institutional needs of politics change. So you have this institutionalization, deinstitutionalization, reinstitutionalization. It's very interesting to see how all these things happen, except if you're in one of these institutes, of course. Then it becomes not so interesting. But it's, you know, the close relation you have with Parliament, which is very rewarding, because I, for example, can ask the president of a committee of the Flemish Parliament to be heard, and he has to invite me to a committee to present results of a report, of a study we did. So this is quite extraordinary. So, because we are also part of the parliamentary system. This is very rewarding, but of course you pay also the price, which is the vulnerability, the discontinuity of politics, and so on. Very important also is, and this was one of my introductory remarks, we don't have the monopoly of this PTA community. Not on technology assessment, not also on this assessing impacts or looking at science and technology in a broader way. You have all kinds of practices there which are institutionalized or not. For example, foresight, forward-looking activities. Let's try to see how in the future, well, this or that evolution will create demands on politics now. This is foresight, and you can see it growing everywhere. Lots of our researchers go into foresight, a lot of foresight people come into our community and so on. We are quite mixed. Science communication, very important. You see the same paradigmatic evolution in science communication, early warning and so on, till participatory. People now speak about participatory science communication. Not only have small children doing pleasant things in huge buildings, but also try to have a dialogue with people on how politics should deal with science and technology. You have the ethical, legal, social and aspects studies, the ELSA studies, which actually was a product of the huge global genomics project, where 5% of all the money from the global genomics project went to ELSA issues. So ethical, legal, social and so on issues, which is actually a kind of TA. And in some branches of science, hard science, you still have this kind of attention for these issues, which are then parked into a parallel program. Risk assessment, risk communication, risk analysis a little bit less. It's also there you have the same discussions, the same kind of motivations and so on. And then of course in rather new branch, sustainability studies, environmental studies, as I said, you have now strategic environmental studies, strategic assessment studies, social impact assessment and so on. All this cluster of activities, we are part of that. We are part of that, but in a very pronounced political way. Try to, in an independent way, try to support politicians in parliament to make better decisions. So what do we do? I try to be brief because time is running out. So let's look at how we actually work. Of course, there are lots of issues to deal with, a lot of aspects to deal with in such an institute. It goes from how do you organize yourself, how do you finance yourself, how do you do priority setting, what kind of approaches do you choose, how do you disseminate your knowledge and your advice, and how do you valorize your knowledge on a societal, let's say, play, in a societal way, but also in parliament. We spend, let's say, 1/5 of our budget on translating, rewriting our reports into a language which is understandable by the great public, and this means also by politicians. So that's Henk Becker's saying 440 pages, 4 pages and 4 lines. This process, this communicative process is, I think, very important. Quality control. All our reports are peer reviewed. All dossiers are reviewed. And criteria of success, of course, I think we have to spend some more time on that later. So, PTA in Flanders, how does it look like? Please let me say also that this year, no, it was last year, that the Walloon region also decided to set up in its parliament, or for its parliament, a mixed kind of institutional setting, parliament and government, for the Walloon community. Why is it not federal Belgium? Because innovation, science, education, everything is the competence of the regions. Economy also. Only taxes and international relations are still federal, and social security, of course, and international relations. So that's why we have a Flemish institute and not a federal institute in our federal parliament, and soon probably a Walloon one. So also for our historical context, we had these big discussions, dioxin scandals in Belgium end of the 90s, and then of course in parliament we had discussions, what we called a symptom of the expert crisis, which was that when there was a discussion on the dioxin in the food for chicken, because that was the big thing, and everybody eat chicken, so there was a big societal problem there, that this party invited expert A, and another party invited expert B, and they were saying, with the same, let's say, scientific background, totally different things. So politicians said, what should we believe here? What kind of expertise do we have here? And then the reflection was made, why not, like in other countries, set up an independent small institute that gives us this information if we ask for it. So that's the background. We also had, of course, a big discussion about the GM foods. This was a big pilot project, beginning of the year 2000, in which we did a public participatory project on GM foods. And then the VILTA at that moment was set up in the year 2000. We had an evaluation, we had a new name, and kind of new processes introduced and so on. And then, of course, the decision was made this year, a couple of months ago, that we will move with different functions to also an independent kind of environment of strategic advisory function for parliament and government. So in the future, we will move, probably, the decision maybe was taken this week, we will move from the parliament to the government, but to an independent part of government, which is a strategic advisory council on innovation and science and technology, in which we will be able to give advice and information to the parliament, like we did, but not so much anymore, I think, but also will give advice and inform the government on its policies. So this will be quite new, and is a bit in perspective of how innovation thinking moves in Europe. But that's another discussion. So what do we do? Lots of projects with lots of people, lots of discussions, lots of really open discussions with the public and so on, but always with methodologies that are robust. We don't invent methodologies. Sometimes we combine them in function of a specific issue we have dealt with. For example, we had a project on elderly and technology, ICT. How do you deal with that? Of course, you do a kind of prospective inventory, you make an inventory, you look at some scenarios, how can this evolve and so on. But then we wanted the opinion of the elderly people also. It is of course not obvious to have this. You can do a survey, but that's not dynamic, it's quite static. So we wanted something which is more dynamic. So we invited elderly people to our parliament, in about, I think, about 500 people in small groups, and we had discussions with them on these different issues. We did the same thing with poor people, technology and poor people in our country. So this was something very delicate, but we said, okay, we will tackle that. How can we get poor people to the parliament? Because they don't have the money. So we went to them. We worked together with NGOs and governmental organizations. We went to all provinces and had very good discussions with poorer people in our society. And but the discussion, was not obvious. How can you discuss? So we had a scenario interpreted by a dramaturg into a kind of theater play, and we had a theater alternative group of theater people who played that about 1 hour play, very humorous, very pleasant, and then we had a discussion on that, because in this theater play, of course, we had all the elements we wanted to be discussed. So this kind of way we worked. We also work very strictly, just a research item, and we commission this research to a university group, and we have a report, and we go with that report to the parliament and say, well, these are the scientific data. So, gives us some examples of that. But if you see, you have really developed a toolkit with a lot of participatory ways of working next to the rigid, traditional, scientific way of working. And this, of course, creates, let's say this needs creativity. You need people who are broad-minded in your team, experienced people, and so on and so on. So this is the way we work. Of course, we made a deliberate choice, and I say we is the parliament, we made a deliberate choice for public participation in TA. So we invite the public to the parliament and go into discussion with them, mainly what we say to increase the democratic quality of decision making. But of course, the primary function, the primauté, is still the parliament. So the parliament, the politicians, we don't take the decision power out of their hands. They are very scary of that. So they have the last words. So we bring lots of material, recommendations, information, and so on, but they have to decide what to do with that. So we're very close. We even go into the committees and have discussions with them. We even bring citizens into the committee, we bring experts into the committee, and so on, and have discussions with them, but then our work stops. We don't take decisions. And that's also a very important message toward decision makers. We don't replace you. You still have the responsibility. We facilitate, we inform you, we try to make a better quality of your decision-making processes, but it's still you who have to decide. So these are some of our projects about food, about the smart grid, about biofuels, healthcare, wise science, the resilience of the science system, which is now under pressure by innovation thinking, it's broadening up, e-science and so on. All these things are changing. How resilient is the science system in our region? Fertility, about intelligent transport systems, energy system in 2050, gender and technology, we just published a book on that, youth and gaming, we set that on the agenda as an opportunity but also as a risk. So all these kind of projects we are dealing with now. And so to summarize, what are the cornerstones of our own practice in Flanders, in our region, in our institute, the IST, is that on one hand we assess, make recommendations, we organize dialogue, we organize, as I said, research, independent research, together with the public debate. We inform, we consult, we have people participate in decision making, and of course with the normative but very clear objective of making the quality of science and society and technology and society decision making better. I thank you.